From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Well, our connection was made by James Madison. Yes, that James Madison, roughly 250 years ago. Madison wrote, quote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. A dependence on the people is, no doubt, the primary control on the government. But experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions," end quote. Alfred University President Mark Zupan referenced that quote for a recent op-ed for the Democrat and Chronicle. And I'm thinking about that Madison warning about the need for auxiliary precautions. What exactly does he mean there? Madison seems to be warning us to guard against flawed men and women who would use government to enrich themselves. The rest of us be damned. As Zupan writes, that story is on full display in the downfall of Venezuela, for example. The World Affairs Council's Rochester chapter has invited Mark Zupan to talk about this issue for their February meeting. Zupan is the author of Inside Job, How Government Insiders Subvert the Public Interest, and he knows a thing or two about how insiders can rig systems, and he's generous enough with his time to come back and talk to us, the president of Alfred University. Mark, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being with us.
Evan, thank you for the opportunity.
Your book, Inside Job, How Government Insiders Subvert the Public Interest, is 7 or 8 years old now. Why did you decide to write it when you did?
Always been fascinated. I started off actually in college interested in being pre-med, and first year discovered I didn't like the sight of blood, so that kind of ruled out that field. And then I'm the son of immigrants, so the dream then was to maybe get into politics, give back to the country in that way. Worked for a congressional representative from Central Ohio, but the more I discovered about that, didn't seem to be the right path. And started off switching then in college to political science. Fascinated with history and political science, and had a great mentor though in economics, and ended up finally majoring in economics and getting a Ph.D. in that field. So have been looking to apply the economic model to the political marketplace. And so it's been a long fascination. Did my undergrad basically dissertation on looking at explaining behavior in the U.S. Senate, what motivates it, to what extent senators respond to the interests of their constituents. And anyway, just been following it and did a fair bit of research then as a faculty member at USC and at Arizona, and then had the opportunity to write the book when I was at Simon at the University of Rochester back in 2014 to 2016.
So just as a brief diversion, and maybe we'll come back to this later, but just because you brought it up here, I think a lot of Americans are under the impression that, for example, U.S. senators, so you raised the idea of researching the Senate, do senators tend to vote based on the interest of their political donors?
People have looked at that, and there's some evidence to that effect, but here in general is the economic model, and it's about 60 years old. The first one to really conceptualize it was an economist at the University of Chicago, George Stigler. And Freud was preoccupied with sex. Economists are preoccupied with the interests that motivate people in marketplaces. So the way economists like me look at politics is it's a marketplace. And on the supply side are either the rulers, the bureaucrats, the elected officials, the public officials more broadly. And on the demand side are special interests that would, the currency or what's traded in the political marketplace is wealth transfers. People on the supply side, elected officials like senators, have the ability to make policy changes. Bureaucrats can make regulatory changes that influence wealth outcomes for interest groups on the demand side. And when Stigler first wrote about this, very much in response to the New Deal legislation, University of Chicago was fairly right-wing, critical of government intervention during the New Deal. And he came to a similar conclusion that Karl Marx, somebody on the opposite side of the ideological spectrum, had come to decades before, that the system would get co-opted primarily by producers. In Marx's case, it was the capitalists. And Stigler saw too many cases with New Deal legislation because firms were more concentrated, could more effectively lobby, that they interceded in the political arena with elected officials and got favorable rulings that benefited them at the expense of consumers. But then what started happening in the 70s is we saw legislation like the EPA or consumer products regulations that didn't seem to fit with producers benefiting, that seemed to also indicate other interest groups could at times move the system in their direction. And Stigler had a fellow economist at Chicago, Sam Peltzman, who posited that it was a multi-group capture system, that different interest groups could compete on the demand side to get the regulatory changes from elected officials on the supply side. So as in college, my mentor had started looking at this, at oil legislation, and we decided to look together at the Surface Mining Reclamation Act of 1977, where we would look at how senators voted on this legislation and to what extent did their voting patterns reflect how coal consumers, energy consumers, how their interests were represented in the state, how surface coal miners, their interests in a particular state, environmental groups. And the surprising thing is when you looked at all these different interest groups and tried to develop as refined measures, they explained some of senatorial voting, but the dominant driver was more the ideologies of the senators. And it was amazing to what extent you could predict how a senator voted on strip mining legislation based on how he or she voted on something like abortion or gun control. And so we started thinking back, well, maybe on a particular issue like strip mining, you don't have as much ability to influence a senator's vote. But what you could do is make sure you put the right ideologue into office. So when we vote for senators every 6 years or House of Representatives every 2 years, we've got to pick people that come in bundles. And so you want to select the ideologue that will most lean in your direction during the course of their tenure. But even there, once we looked at the interests that influence which ideologues get put into office, there was still a fair bit of slack in a democracy like ours for individual senators or individual members of the House to vote their consciences. And people have vastly different, at the time we were looking at it, somebody like an Orrin Hatch versus a Ted Kennedy could be on vastly different sides of the ideological spectrum, but their personal beliefs on particular pieces of legislation, they still had a great deal of latitude. And then we got into what the implications of that are, and then started thinking, not just in democracies, but could the insights also be applied more broadly? Because until 200 years ago, autocracies were the norm.
Yeah, and so forgive me then for the diversion on the Senate, but let's kind of maybe peel back and do a little bit of definition here. So your book's title is How Government Insiders Subvert the Public Interest, and that's what you're not only writing about in regards to Venezuela, which we're going to talk about, but that's part of the subject you're going to bring to the World Affairs Council. How do you what is a government insider? What's the definition there?
Can it be anywhere from a king or queen, a monarch? It can be bureaucrats, military, public officials, elected officials. And if we were thinking about this topic, and let me back up a little bit, the way the economic model first got developed, where governments broke down the last 60 years, the focus was on the demand side. Interest groups, whether it's 1%ers, environmentalists, consumer advocates, producers, that they would co-opt the system at the expense of the general public interest. But if we'd looked at this issue 200 years ago, when autocracies were the norm, the focus would be much more on the supply side, that where countries run aground is where the rulers have made decisions or have either pursued for kleptocratic means for their own benefit, or for their the biggest train wrecks, would argue, have occurred where the ideological interests, whether it's Stalin or Mao or Pol Pot, that you want to impose a particular worldview, and political offices are unique places in terms of being able to promote your own worldview. And let me share a quote. There's an 18th century German Romantic poet, Friedrich Holderlin, who said, what has made the state hell on earth has been precisely because individuals have tried to make it a heaven. And so what's central to the book is, let's not, these folks on the supply side, whenever there is a crime committed, investigators look who has the motive, the means, and the opportunity. Folks on the supply side have all three. And so we can't neglect when things break down in countries like in Venezuela or in other parts of the world. And this problem applies not just to autocracies, but to democracies like ours.
I promise we'll get to Venezuela coming up here, but I have to, and forgive me, audience, I'm going to read something that's kind of lengthy, but it's one of the more extraordinary things I've read in months. Read it this weekend. The author of what I'm about to read is Andy McCarthy. He is a longtime writer for the National Review, and the National Review is not a never Trump publication. They've got some writers who are not Trump fans. McCarthy is probably one of them now, but this is a very conservative publication, and McCarthy is a contributing editor at National Review. He's a former chief assistant U.S. attorney. He's an attorney himself, and he's no fan of Democrats. I want to read what McCarthy wrote about the way the U.S. federal government has been used to benefit insiders this weekend. Quote, before we get into the gory details, it is worth observing that at National Review, we extensively covered the Biden family business of corruptly profiteering off Joe Biden's political power and influence. So did congressional Republicans. Indeed, 3 investigative committees spent hundreds of hours gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and threatening to hold President Biden's son Hunter in contempt. House Republicans even opened an impeachment inquiry, which generated a scathing report on the conspiracy to monetize Joe Biden's office of public trust to enrich the Biden family. The sum generated over several years of Biden's self-dealing was over $27 million. That number flashed in neon throughout the report's 291 pages, $27 million. Republicans were especially incensed because the Bidens practiced their harlotry on foreigners, in particular agents of China. Family avarice, rather than the national interest, drove United States government policy. The House impeachment report thundered, and he quotes from the House impeachment report now, Joe Biden has exhibited conduct and taken actions that the founders sought to guard against in drafting the impeachment provisions in the Constitution: abuse of power, foreign entanglements, corruption, and obstruction of investigations into these matters. The committee's investigative work has revealed that the Biden family, with the full knowledge and cooperation of President Biden, has engaged in a global influence peddling racket from which they made millions of dollars. So here's what McCarthy says next. You know what the difference is between the Biden family business and the Trump family business? You'd have to add 2 digits to the sum of Biden abuses of power, foreign entanglements, and corruption alleged in the report to get near what Trump has raked in just from the United Arab Emirates. Of course, Trump can't be faulted for obstructing congressional investigations because there haven't been any. Comer is busy tangling with the Clintons, the better to take the Epstein heat off a president whose poll numbers have declined as this year's midterm elections beckon. Now that self-dealing has achieved heights so astronomical that $27 million would barely be a rounding error, Republicans have lost interest. The lid was blown off the sordid Trump UAE story by a blockbuster Wall Street Journal report last week. But then we'd already learned about President Trump's shocking pardon of Zhao after Zhao helped orchestrate the UAE's $2 billion purchase of the Trump crypto enterprise's startup stablecoin. And thanks to prior Wall Street Journal reporting, we also know that Zhao had contributed Binance expertise to help WLF's crypto infrastructure. End quote. This is part of a 5-part series that Andy McCarthy is writing about corruption in the Trump administration. This is a longtime Republican conservative attorney who was one of the most merciless critics of the Biden administration and the Biden family. And he says what we're seeing now dwarfs what happened with the Biden administration. As an outsider now, you're not the insider, Mark. Do you agree with what you heard there?
I think it's a very legitimate worry. And I wrote the book before I knew I'd become a university president. Wading into politics is a difficult task. When you're a university president, you want to be unbiased, impartial. But I do believe there's an important issue to still tackle, and it spans political lines. And the same thing that, it's striking looking at the book when I was writing it 2014, 2015, President Trump doesn't get much mention. More emphasis at the time on Rubio and the Clinton family and how much the Clintons were making on speaking fees with ties to particular companies and some of Marco Rubio's connections and benefits to the family from particular supporters. It'd be a much longer book, is the best way to put it. If I had to do now a second edition, and it's in terms of adding a couple zeros to the equation, I think is spot on. And all the more reason for important institutional checks and balances. Peggy Noonan had a marvelous piece in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend bemoaning what's happening in the Washington Post and the important role journalism played. And she cites this famous quote from Thomas Jefferson that if he had to choose, he'd rather have the media without government than the government without media. So having people shine a light on what's going on, the same way with Navalny, when in his cohort, when he revealed this billion-dollar palace that Putin had built on the Black Sea for himself and with all the lavish accoutrements. So these are important issues to be raised, and what's made this country successful is effective checks and balances, and we still have it within our power, and we got to remain mindful. We can't take it for granted that because it's worked reasonably well for the last 250 years, that it will continue to work.
So let me hit two aspects of that, and it's based on some of the debate I heard. I try not to watch a whole lot of cable news. It's bad for my brain and my head. But, sometimes I lapse into it, Mark. And there was conservative does not even feel like the correct word here because I don't really know what that means in the modern context. But there was a Trump supporting commentator who was saying essentially, so what Andy McCarthy is writing about? Every president makes a ton of money when they leave the White House. He talked about Barack Obama getting paid $400,000 a pop to go speak at Wall Street. He talked about what the Clintons got paid, as you do in your book. And this commentator was saying, they all make money. They make a ton of money. So who cares if you do it when you're in office or not in office? Trump is a businessman. He knows how to leverage his office. He's going to make money now. He's going to make money in the future. What do we care when that's happening? What's the big deal? I want to get your take on that first, this notion of, is there a difference between profiting now versus profiting in the future? And I'm also curious to know if you do find, if there should be limits. I mean, like Barack Obama might say, this is the free market. Right now, this is what this group wants to pay me to come speak. Am I not supposed to take it? What does Mark Zupan say?
I think there are ways, there are less pernicious ways, especially when you're no longer in office. But when you remain in office, for example, suing the IRS for, what was it, $10 billion when you've appointed the head of the IRS, and it just, there aren't appropriate checks and balances if that's allowed to proceed. So if you can dip into the till, what it does in terms of trust, it erodes trust in terms of promoting rent seeking, that if I realize with this person in power, if I get close to him or her, people will spend money on currying favor as opposed to doing productive activities. So it's more dangerous when that activity is pursued by people in office, I would argue, than after office. And it is true that, and again, it spans the aisle, two Republican House speakers. Dennis Hastert was a teacher and a wrestling coach before he ran for Congress, ended up becoming a multimillionaire. You can trace some of the connections that he made that allowed that to happen. Newt Gingrich, all the speaking fees that he generated. So it spans both sides of the aisle, but I would argue strongly it's more pernicious when, and at the magnitude, because it starts to erode the culture of, and it starts to set a bad example for how other people behave in your society.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's obvious to almost everybody listening that there's a huge difference between if you get paid to give speaking fees after you're the president versus if you're trying to make $2 billion on a crypto deal with foreign interest in the first year of a presidency. I would hope that that's obvious. But there's this nihilism that seems to be building up. And I'm going to read an email to you here, Mark. I mean, CY writes and says, so all I'm hearing is that Trump is better at making money than other corrupt politicians. But that's capitalism, right? Whoever makes the most money wins. I mean, I understand the nihilism that is, I think, reflected in this email. But I reject it, and I think it's dangerous. I think there is a difference and I think that's partially what McCarthy's trying to do in the National Review, which is to say we should not accept corruption of any kind. But we are at a different level, and it is not all the same. So how do you start differentiating when it's truly dangerous or when it's at a level that is beyond sort of something we've seen before or something that's even sort of safe for the continuation of our society, Mark?
And there's more to just money. It's also the value of liberty, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. So we do an exercise. I had the pleasure of co-teaching a class this past fall on designing your life. And with our students, we did a noodle exercise where you give a team of students 20 long pieces of lasagna, some scotch tape, a paper clip, and a marshmallow. And the whole challenge is to design a tower that'll be as high as possible with the marshmallow on top. And then you let the teams go. And what's fascinating is when this exercise is run, teams of kindergartners routinely do the best. Teams of Ph.D s, teams of MBA students or JDs don't do as well. People too often defer to authority or assume somebody's more knowledgeable. Kindergartners are willing to try stuff. And I think the fundamental benefit of democracy is it gives greater agency, freedom of thought, freedom of action to the broadest possible footprint of people. And the more you erode that, where people are deferring to just one person knows best, or this person has to make the decision as to, will this particular venture, we will be less vibrant as a society. And that's what's fundamentally, the more we can preserve that kernel of liberty and agency, the better off any country will be.
We're talking to Mark Zupan, the president of Alfred University, the author of Inside Job, How Government Insiders Subvert the Public Interest, although I fear that quickly he's going to have to write a second and a third edition to keep up with the times. And Mark is speaking tonight to the Rochester chapter of the World Affairs Council, and I know they appreciate his expertise in the subject, talking about government insiders, rigged systems, etc. In our second half hour, we're going to talk about the recent piece that he wrote about Venezuela and what we can learn from stories like that. Let's grab a couple of phone calls. Hoover in Pittsford first. Hi, Hoover. Go ahead.
Hey, guys. What a great discussion. Yes, I did read Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday, and she did speak about the Washington Post and how Jeff Bezos has neglected his responsibility when he bought that newspaper. So when we lose our journalists and journalism, the Republic is in trouble. Look, years ago, I worked at City Hall when we still had we had a city manager form of government before the strong mayor form came in here in Rochester. I was director of internal audit, and I had a team of financial and program auditors that worked for me in City Hall, and we reviewed operations of the city. A lot of it had to do with federal funding, but some of them didn't. And like the police department has internal investigations because they know they have power and they better do it right. So they all have an internal investigation program. Well, we had one at the city. And when we went to a strong mayor, they abolished the office. Fortunately, I had left by the time that happened, so it didn't impact me. But I ran that office for about 5 years, staff of about 6 people. And we did internal audits. I can tell you right now, every one of the audits we had went to city council. There wasn't one that came back to 100% clean. Every time we did an audit, we found stuff that needed to be corrected, either programmatically or personnel-wise. So the idea that government can do a good job is true. We can do a good job, but we've got to audit ourselves. So, you guys are right on. It's a great discussion this morning. We got to figure out a way to audit the federal level better. They have the A95 review process, but with the Department of Internal Audit at the federal level, but it's just not working like it should be. So I'll listen to what you have to say, but we do need better auditors at the federal level. And if you want to audit the president, put a clause in the Constitution, just like we said, he only can serve 2 terms. He or she can only serve 2 terms. How about if we limit access to certain financial opportunities for 10 years and put them on a long-term salary for 10 years so he or she keeps their nose clean? What do you think about that?
Yeah, Hoover,
could be done.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll let President Zupan talk about that. My sense, Hoover, in reading some of the emails already, is that this nihilism is sort of this creeping nihilism. People are going, well, it doesn't matter anymore. They're all bad. And it's not all the same. And I'm with you, Hoover, that this can be audited. This can be checked. That's what Madison is talking about here, that President Zupan cites in his piece. I mean, again, I'll read it briefly again. Madison says that you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Madison saw that. I don't think anybody, going back to the framers, thought that the standard was perfection. That's not achievable. And just the fact that we have some corruption doesn't mean that you give up. But I think it gets to a point where if you can't audit yourself at all, if there's not any meaningful check, then you're really in trouble. So Mark Zupan, Hoover is saying, you get into office, you get out of office, some sort of a 10-year limit on your financial opportunities, and for the sake of simply saying, this is too prone to corruption. Let's put real policy in place that is designed to take this head on here. What do you see there?
The importance of checks and balances. So getting rid of inspector generals at the federal level that perform that audit function. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of the book focuses on Transparency International since 1995. They've been rating, and they do a public corruptions index. Nowadays, for 182 countries, they compile rankings and assessments from 13 different organizations around the globe, and they rate a country on a 0 to 100 scale. 0 being completely corrupt, 100 being completely clean. And what's fascinating, about 2/3 of the world's countries nowadays are democracies, 1/3 are autocracies. Democracies do appreciably better on this Transparency International scale, but they're still below the 50 mark. So in terms of cleanliness, and the latest Transparency International rating just came out this morning. There used to be 2 countries with 90 and above. This year, there's no country 90 and above. So even democracies have rooms for improvement. And sometimes we get investments right. We live in an area that benefited from a immensely successful public investment. The Erie Canal, we just celebrated 200 years. It had paid for its costs within 10 years. It made Rochester the first boom town, made New York State the Empire State. Eventually, railroads eroded it. We became more of a high-tax state. But even looking at, in the city of Rochester, just look, for example, at the Rochester Unified School District, the latest budget, $1.1 billion. It had been $802 million in 2016 and $694 million in 2011. Over that same time period, right now, we're just shy of 20,000 students in the district versus 27,600 in 2016 and 30,700 in 2011. If you do the math, per pupil per year, Rochester Unified is spending $55,000 to educate our students. So budget's been going up while enrollment's been going down. So looking into the efficacy, or is there a better model? How can we better? The highest priced private school, the list price is $33,000 just north at a place like Harley or Allendale. So comparing that to the $55,000, the importance of auditing, benchmarking, checking, questioning, couldn't agree more. And then we'll just say people are very creative for both good and ill. So Russia had term limits. Putin got elected. Yeltsin picked him or backed him as a successor, served 2 terms. there was a 2-term limit in Russia. What he figured out was how to get somebody as a stand-in, Medvedev, to run where he was pulling the strings behind the scenes, was then able to come back. They extended the terms to 6 years. He served 2 6-year terms. Now they've extended it to allow for 2 more terms. Erdogan in Turkey did the same thing. He moved to a lower level post once he reached the term limit, but then figured out how to accumulate power in the lower, and he's still pulling all the strings basically in Turkey. So people can still get creative, and that's where continually checks and balances and questioning what people do, either whether it's with respect to term limits or how they make money.
Well, on the subject of term limits, here's someone who's had a lot to say about that. He's been a state legislator. He's been a county legislator. It's Mark Johns. Hi, Mark. Go ahead.
Hey, hi, Mark. Hi, Evan. Look, all reform starts with term limits. And, I'm the only elected official that actually pushes it. But I always say vote for me because I'm the TLC. And TLC nowadays means term limits candidate. And by the way, it's the same website, votemarkjohns.com and votetlc.com. Your guest brought up a good point. Vladimir Putin gets reelected. Serves the 2 terms, gets rid of term limits. How about Xi Jinping in China? They used to have 2 5-year terms. He gets reelected, and man, is he popular, 100% of the vote. That guy's really something. And he gets rid of term limits. Daniel Ortega, Mr. Freedom Fighter down in Nicaragua. Now he's Mr. Term Limits, or unlimited term president for life. He gets rid of term limits. Maduro. The corruption starts because you can't get rid of the people that are in the top. And they get the money, they have the power, they have the influence, and everybody else that's an elected official that gets the same money and the party blesses it. In New York State, it's Democrats. Down in Texas, it would be Republicans. I don't care what party you're with. Too much power and too much money for too long is corrupting. And it may be legal. Mitch McConnell said, well, it's not corrupting, it's legal. Well, guess what? Just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's right. And it has to start with term limits, because once you get term limits on all these elected guys and men and women, once you get term limits on them, they're not always thinking about just getting reelected and reelected to the next election and the one after that, taking the big money that funds their campaigns, doing the favor for the big money that funds their campaigns. And then you get these situations where you don't have independent redistricting. New York State was the first one in 22. They said they were going to have an independent redistricting process. They didn't do it. Turns out that even after they rigged it, it wasn't rigged good enough. So in 24, New York State re-gerrymandered the districts again. And then all of a sudden Texas says, hey, look, it looks like a good idea. Now they're trying to do it, and all the other states are following in line. So it all starts with term limits. Then you can get independent redistricting, real campaign finance reform. Let's have these elected people, men and women, put their money in some type of blind trust where they can't make money off of the money they have invested. And I'm telling you something that I really think that both parties, not the elected officials, okay, but both parties agree with. The Democrats took over the county ledge in Onondaga County, Syracuse area. There was also a term limits ballot. There was a term limits initiative on that ballot. It got 75% of the vote.
Well, let me jump in here, Mark, because we're kind of getting far afield here. And I know that Mark has a lot of passion for real government reform. He's been doing that kind of work for years. And I appreciate the phone call, Mark. And I will also just say, to Mark's point about what's happened in states that have followed, California follows Texas, and, drawing the maps and trying to protect congressional majorities. I get it. I think Indiana is an example of an outlier there. I mean, I haven't seen anything to contradict what I read a few weeks ago, that Indiana stood up and said, we're not going to do what the president wants, which is redraw those maps again. It's not time. So, and that was Republicans in the Indiana State House. So it's possible to resist that. But Mark, I do appreciate the point, and I want to focus Mark's point, Mark Zupan, on his call for term limits. So take the floor. Go ahead.
The last chapter of the book is titled, How Do We Form a More Perfect Union? And it's basically like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. We're wearing the slippers. It's within our power. And term limits is one of the recommendations that I make in the book. And at the time I was writing it, in the state of New York, we had two people in 2015, Dean Skelos, a Republican Senate Majority Leader, and Sheldon Silver, the Assembly Leader, who were both arrested on corruption charges. And it'd be hard to not argue that both, because they'd been there so long, had developed these conduits for skimming at the expense of the public interest. Skelos had been in office since 1985, Sheldon Silver for 40 years since then. So it's one of the ways that we need to look across states, across parties. The incumbency in the House and Senate nationally has grown appreciably over the last 100 years. And one of the things that's happened, especially over the last 50 years, is something called facilitation services. So if you're a member of the House, people figured out, and Lyndon Johnson was one of the first to do so, if you've read any of Robert Caro's stuff, that if you take care of unsticking bureaucratic hassles for your constituents, they will give you credit for that. And you will get support and better be able to remain in office. When you vote on controversial issues like gun control or abortion, you're going to piss off a substantial portion of your electorate, and you're not going to have as much influence on the outcome, so you're less able to take credit. So these facilitation services, when I worked for this congressional rep in Ohio, it was amazing the amount of time and staff effort devoted to pleasing the constituents back home. But what's happened as a result is it's insulated people in Congress, and it's made them less accountable. It's given them more slack to pursue what they want to do when it comes time to, whether it's ideological interests or whether it's promoting their pecuniary interests.
Mark Johns, thank you for the phone call. We're really late for a break. Let's take that short break. We'll come right back with Alfred University President Mark Zupan, who is also the author of Inside Job, How Government Insiders Subvert the Public Interest. He is speaking tonight to the World Affairs Council Rochester chapter for their February meeting on the power of insiders in government and how that sort of corrupts systems and what we should know about it. And we'll come right back with your feedback next.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org. And Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, working with members to find health coverage for every stage of life, helping to make care and coverage more accessible in more ways for more people across the Rochester community. Details online at excellusbcbs.com.
Utilities are cutting power to some customers to prevent wildfires.
Is it a drag? Yeah. No one loves a power shutoff, but they really do prevent fires.
I'm Amy Scott, weighing the costs of a power outage. Next time on Marketplace.
Tonight at 6:30.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson, and back to your phone calls we go. Andrew in Irondequoit next. Hello, Andrew.
Hey, you guys. Great show. The right of free... Here's a quote from James Madison: the right of freely examining public characters and measures and of free communication thereon is the only effective guardian for every other right. I like that one quite a bit. I have you were talking about nihilism.
Yeah.
The capitalist, that comment about capitalism, you know, capitalism is you making a better product, and then that's how you have such good electronics and such good cars nowadays and stuff like that, because that's who wins, not making the most money, but who makes the best products. That's why you have such great stuff. Anyway, I was going to ask your guest a question, and that is, when is Ilhan Omar going to write a book on the virtues of American capitalism?
Oh, boy. Okay.
Because, I mean, really, she was worth less than $1 million last year, and in 400 days, she's worth $30 million, according to her congressional finance papers. I mean, really, it's a little questionable.
Andrew, I got to jump in and say I know zilch about Ilhan Omar's finances. I'm not sort of affirming or denying what you're saying. I just haven't read about it at all. And I take your point, by the way, about your feeling about capitalism, because the corruption and the insider dealing that we've been talking about this hour are not unique to any single economic system. They are unique to the human experience, and humans are involved in all of these systems. Having said that, Mark Zupan, anything you want to add there? That was a pretty good Madison quote that Andrew dug up too.
Yeah, I would agree. And there was a study done a few years ago, and Louise Slaughter was at the heart of the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act of 2012. So between 1985 and 2001, spanning both parties, a member of the Senate, their return on their assets was 12.3 percentage points higher than the market return, and 6 percentage points higher for House members. So either we're electing people that can beat Warren Buffett, or they're closer to certain information. And the Stock Act helped limit that, but again, human nature, both capable of doing noble things, but it's finding checks and balances and continually questioning. And it's not just in the United States. In the biggest democracy in the world, people that win electoral office in India, 3 to 5% higher annual asset appreciation if you win than if you lose. And when I was writing the book in 1 year, 34% of the winners were under criminal indictment at the same time. So,
thank you for the phone call there, Andrew. Joe says there's two things I've never seen in my life: a fat UPS guy and a poor politician. All right, Joe, I guess I take the point. That's a stark way of putting it. Rick says John Adams also gives us good advice. David McCullough's biography of John Adams includes an excerpt from a letter to his son Thomas. Public business, my son, must always be done by somebody. If wise men decline, others will not. If honest men refuse it, others will not. Clearly, Adams understood the importance of getting wise and honest citizens to serve in government. We need to remember and put this into practice. Our society has lost sight of the importance of adhering to honorable values. How do we foster better character among those involved in public business? It's from Rick. It's a really good question. And, Mark, when I was growing up, I kind of idolized my dad, and I always thought, well, my dad would be great in public office. I was a kid. And I remember he said to me, here's what happens to good people who run for office. They either get beaten down and they quit, or they become what they despise. And years later, I said, gosh, that is really cynical. I hope it's not true. But John Adams clearly, according to Rick's email, thought that wasn't true, that it does matter, character will matter, and we need to get back to choosing it. I mean, again, I'm not the arbiter of character. I don't know any one person is, but I don't know that has been at the top of the list in recent years. So what do you think? Is character, is there a way to sort of bring it back into the equation?
Hugely important, and I'm an optimist at heart and believe over the long arc of history, we will keep moving in the right direction. Right now, the last 10 years, Transparency International scores have been declining. There have been other similar declining periods of time in the 1930s during the Cold War. So fundamentally, systems that give liberty and agency to people outperform. But you go through peaks and valleys along the way. One of the wonderful things Washington left us was leaving after 2 terms. He could have easily stayed on. There were people that hoped that office would be for life, and that set the norm until FDR. And then we had a constitutional amendment to limit our terms, presidential terms, to 2 in this country. So identifying character, one of my big idols in life is Abraham Lincoln. The background that he came from, his ability to use humor, and his ability fundamentally to make decisions that made and at times he was too slow to make the decisions, but those inspire you, belief in your country and wanting to do more for your own team.
Thank you, Rick, there. John emails, one more email, and then I want to ask Mark to talk about Venezuela before we wrap the hour here. But John wants to know about what he says. Evan, what are your guest thoughts on Pete Buttigieg talking about money and speech? And so I dug up the recent comments. So here's what Pete Buttigieg said last month. He said, in a country that amended its constitution so you could not purchase a beer and then realized it was a bad idea and amended it back, surely we can have an amendment clarifying that a corporation is not a person and money is not speech. Mark Zupan, what do you think of that?
I don't know if I'd go that far, but certainly the extent to which particular companies, their ability to coalesce power, exercise it, it's something to worry about. Outlawing it, I don't know if I'd go that far as to agree, but anytime there's a concentration of power, it erodes the checks and balances and the health of the system, and whether it's on the supply side or the demand side. When I wrote the book, one of the chapters deals with China, the world's largest autocracy, most populous autocracy. And at the time of the 1,200 richest individuals, 1 in 7 were in government. And their combined wealth was, of the ones in government, was 500 billion, which dwarfed at the time the wealth of President Obama, his administration, the House and Senate, the Supreme Court. I don't know if it would be the same this time around, especially depending on when Elon Musk was still head of Doge, if you count his worth and exercising influence. So anytime there's too much of a concentration of power, this is what economists worry about, monopolies lead to suboptimal outcomes.
All right. Your piece in the Democrat and Chronicle focuses on Venezuela, and of course the world's attention has been there. And you write about some of what we've all been sort of learning or relearning, which is that this was a very prosperous country. It does have a ton of resources. It was a good story until it became a tragic story in the last several decades of terrible and corrupt leadership. And now, I mean, for whatever you think about the Trump administration's decision to go take Maduro, there does appear to be a chance for a clean start, although it looks to me like the rest of the regime is still in place there. I don't see anything other than Maduro gone. So I don't know what lessons you want us to draw from Venezuela. What should we take from that?
One of the key things is you could have turnover at the very top level, and yet the corruptness of the institution, not the corruptness of the nation, not changing much. Italy has changed governments on average since World War II every 13 months. And even though there's a change, there's electoral competition. When you look at the Transparency International scores, Italy does not fare well in terms of perceptions of cleanliness of the national government. Mexico, there you serve 6 years terms, and then there's a competition for the next person on top. So even though Maduro's gone, the infrastructure is still there. Heavy control over the oil industry. So the biggest legit industry, the Cartel of the Suns, that's also affiliated with the military, heavy control of the narcotics industry in that country. So I don't expect much change in terms of the cleanliness of the country, even though Maduro's gone.
What do you think the story on the power of insiders in government is, and lessons from Venezuela?
That they're very hard, and even when autocracies get overthrown, 75–80% of the time they get replaced by another autocracy. Oh. So just turnover doesn't guarantee better outcomes. It can lead to even more pernicious outcomes. So Venezuela used to be called Saudi Venezuela, 50s and 60s. It was viewed as the up-and-coming country in the world. More oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. Now, oil production, though, first under Chavez and then Maduro, fell by 70%. The bolivar, the national currency, lost 99.9% of its value over 10. They tried monetary policy to compensate, and how much of it was their own doing, suppressing the media. Chavez had a Twitter account, 200 employees just managing his Twitter account, millions of followers in the country, his own radio show, his own TV show, just to expound a particular viewpoint. PDVSA huge company, oil production company, became a personal kiddie bank, first for Chavez, followed by Maduro. They, on a whim, changed the time zone by 30 minutes, added a star to the national flag. His 9-year-old daughter wanted to change the national emblem, change the emblem. There was a constitution. He was democratically elected. He had first tried to foment a coup, was in prison, came out, democratically elected. As soon as he got elected, disbanded the assembly, rewrote the Constitution, sent the Supreme Court packing. So just one of these classic cases of a country driving itself into the ground, but primarily on the supply side because there weren't sufficient checks and balances. And it started off with the democracy.
I want to thank you not only for sharing the hour with us, but by also making sure we don't emerge from this hour with that sense that nothing matters, that it's all the same. I mean, it does matter. And for those who want to read more, they can pick up your book. It's called Inside Job, How Government Insiders Subvert the Public Interest. It is not a nihilistic screed at all. I mean, this is really, I think, an important set of civic education for all of us to understand the risks, but also the possibilities if we pick a better course. Mark Zupan, president of Alfred University. I know they'll appreciate you at Rochester's chapter of the World Affairs Council. We always appreciate you on Connections. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for the opportunity, Evan. Have a good day.
And we'll post Mark's latest writings in our show notes as well if you want to check it out. Always great having him on with us. More Connections coming up in just a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.